So for folks joining us, we're just going to give people a moment to come into the presentation. Just going to wait a few more moments and then we will go ahead and start. I want to make sure everybody joins us at the beginning. Okay, it looks like the numbers have slowed down a bit, so I am going to go ahead and get started because we know that you are busy lawyers. So welcome to another installment of Webinar for Busy Lawyers, and we're happy to have you here with us today, and welcome Julian Sarafian. My name is Amy Levine. I am the Director of Programs and Volunteers, and I will be your host for today's webinar, Beyond the Law Firm, Exploring Alternative Careers for JDs. Before I introduce our presenter, Julian, I want to remind you what Lawyers Concerned for Lawyers offers. We provide a range of free and confidential services to support the legal community's well-being, which includes one-on-one consultations with licensed clinicians for mental health and substance misuse challenges, peer support groups, educational programs, and one-on-one consultations with our law practice advisor on law firm practice management and professionalism. And now I am truly honored to introduce our speaker. Julian is a lawyer and entrepreneur. He graduated from UC Berkeley, where he received his BA in economics and then received his JD from Harvard Law School. He is a former Big Law associate who turned content creator and lawyer for creators, influencers, and small businesses with his firm, Creators by Creators. As a creator on social media, he talks politics, provides legal analysis, and is an advocate for mental health. He is also actively building communities focused on professional interpersonal development on social media and Discord. Julian's advocacy work has been covered by the New York Times, Bloomberg Law, Business Insider, CNBC, and Newsweek. He has also given multiple TEDx talks. And finally, he's a published writer for The American Lawyer, Law 360, Bloomberg Law, just to name a few. And he is just the person to discuss alternative careers for JDs. Quick housekeeping tip, please use either the chat or the Q&A feature for your questions at the end of the presentation. We'd love to hear from you and answer as many questions as possible. And without further ado, here is Julian.
Thank you, Amy, for the wonderful introduction, and thank you for having me. I'm a big fan of Lawyers Concerned for Lawyers because, as I'm going to talk about a little bit today, lawyers are unique in that we have a set of mental health struggles and conditions that other professions, unfortunately, don't face to the same degree we do. And so it's really important that folks feel like they're not alone out there, and your organization is doing tremendous work on that front. So for folks who are listening in here today live, hello, obviously, and it's great to see all of you. I hope you had a great Thanksgiving. If you're listening in later, thank you for joining and giving me your time, and make sure all of you guys take advantage of the resources that Concern for Lawyers offers, because they are real and they can make a big difference in your well-being. So let's get into it. The JD outside of law. Again, my name is Julian Sarafian. It's good to meet all of you guys. Just a quick overview of who I am. I graduated UC Berkeley for undergrad. I did economics as my undergrad major, went on to law school. First, I was at NYU for my first year. I ended up transferring to Harvard Law School. There's a backstory there. It's not very exciting, but the bottom line is I ended up going to HLS and graduated about 6 years ago, going on 7 in the spring here. And I've been a practicing lawyer for most of my time outside and post-graduation. First, I was at Wilson Sonsini, a big law firm, and then I pivoted. I did a bunch of different stuff. And we'll talk about that. From writing to coaching to just e-commerce entrepreneurship, and eventually I landed on sort of what I do now, which is being a content creator on one hand, and on the other hand, being an advocate and an attorney for content creators and small businesses. You might think, well, that's not really outside of law. And you're not wrong, right? I am still practicing law for part of what I do, but not in the traditional sense. I'm a solo practitioner. I'm in a new area of law that's rapidly developing. And we'll talk about, what that is to be entrepreneurial inside the law, because I think there's a lot of opportunity for that. And as a high level overview, I'm going to talk to you guys today about my career path, what led me here, and for yourselves, how to make a plan and actually think through if you want to use your JD outside of the traditional law firm or legal clerk type of job. How do you get there? I will say if you're happy in your current role practicing law, then that's great. Don't overthink it. Don't just assume, okay, well, there's all these lawyers that don't seem very thrilled to be here. Maybe I'm one of them, or maybe something's wrong with me. Like, that's not at all true, right? And that even goes for big law. There are plenty of people I know, some of my closest friends, who are very happy with their big law careers, and that's great, right? God bless, Godspeed. Um, Always take the positives without the negatives, but of course, for folks who are interested in things outside of those types of roles, we'll get into that, what it looks like. So briefly, when I was an undergrad, I worked briefly at the White House. I was a research assistant for various professors. And during law school, I did kind of the standard summer stuff, summer associate first at DLA Piper. And then my second summer, I was at Wilson Sonsini. Of course, I've talked to you guys about this already. I was an associate at Wilson Sonsini for roughly 3 years before I quit outright. We'll talk about that in a minute. And when I was there, I did general transactional corporate work. So I helped, startup companies through Series F, Series G financing companies, through IPOs, public companies, the whole gamut of transactional work. Wilson Sonsini is predominantly focused on technology companies. So that was my focus. It wasn't, big banks and hedge funds as much as like the new cybersecurity startup that was, taking Silicon Valley by storm a couple of years ago. And now, of course, I run my own law firm, For Creators by Creators PC, and I make content. A lot of people think, and I know this for a fact because I talk to people about this, when they see the resume, that like my life must be perfect, and I felt this way, especially in the pandemic. But it's really dangerous to only look at the positives. And I think LinkedIn, unfortunately, does a lot of this, but it's gotten a lot better because people are a lot more open on the platform. But let me be clear, right? Nothing comes for free. And the high achievement and the pressure that it took to get the best grades at all these various stages of my academic career certainly had impacts on my physical and mental health. As a highlight reel, right? And in high school, I ended up getting sort of stomach pain from overstudying for the SAT. I shouldn't say overstudying. I should just say studying because that's what it was. But it was intense, and I went to the doctor, and they're like, "Okay, we think that you have excess acid in your stomach, so let's get that taken care of and get you medication." And then when I was studying for the LSAT, maybe something y'all can relate to. I hope you can't, but unfortunately, I'm sure some of you can. I started getting panic attacks, freaking out about what if I don't do well and I don't get into law school, and this test is so important. First time I'd ever really had panic attacks, even though I had been through the exam process multiple times with finals and whatnot, but it's different, obviously, with the LSAT. And then in my mid-20s, I started getting this feeling almost like I had to throw up, except nothing would actually come out. It was very unpleasant. And at the end of the day, it ended up being related to just mismanagement of stress and anxiety. Things that when I was growing up, I'm like a younger millennial, we never really learned about in school. Mental health was something that no one really talked about. To the extent it was, it came up briefly when we lost somebody to suicide. And even then, it was kind of like a superficial, oh, it's really sad, how they were, but I guess, for us, we should just be grateful and then let's just move on. So I think there's a lot of ignorance in the world of mental health, which unfortunately makes it harder for folks to figure out what's going on, and again, I think that this is changing, but it's taken a lot of time. And I want to hat tip Lawyers Concerned for Lawyers for being part of that process, helping folks in our profession. When I was in big law, the pandemic hit. And in some ways, it was an ideal time, to be in big law because things were busy. I didn't have to worry necessarily about getting laid off, right? We're privileged in that way. Lawyers are, right? We are white collar professionals. We can work from our laptop from anywhere. That's what I'm doing right now, talking to you guys. And it was the same during the pandemic. But at the same time, we kind of became, and I don't know if folks have practiced in the pandemic who are on this webinar right now, but maybe you can relate if so, because I felt like at my firm, it was a dehumanizing experience in the sense that without any sort of in-person interaction, we kind of just became email inboxes, junior associates and mid-level associates, and up and down the food chain too, right? I have no doubt partners struggled with this too. The isolation sucked, right? It was awful, and the work did not slow down. If anything, it got busier for us. Led me to struggle with depression and thoughts of suicide, which was tough and something that I didn't ever expect that I would deal with. And I'm lucky to have lived a positive life until that point. And again, I want to outline that the problem here is nobody talks about this, and the stigma locks people in place. The stigma, both on the social side, people don't know how to talk about it. It's kind of a weird thing to talk about, but also the professional side. Like, oh, if this person has mental health issues, maybe they can't handle, doing this really intense and prestigious deal that I'm bringing. Maybe they're not cut out for it, right? That whole like old school mindset where mental health equals weakness, when in fact what it means really is self-awareness. And I won't, dive into this too much deeper other than saying that, again, this is something that lawyers specifically struggle with. I want to like caution everybody on this call to break out of that bubble of what it is to be an attorney and the legal culture, because the legal culture and being an attorney can sometimes be very tough. Our profession leads in rates of anxiety and depression and substance abuse. I think the bad habits a lot of the time in our profession are normalized, especially in the law firm setting. And this is not a specific firm problem. I believe that it's an industry problem. So if you think you're crazy sometimes because you look at the person above you and you're like, that doesn't seem like a healthy lifestyle, you're not crazy, even if everybody else is also living that same lifestyle and they seem to be okay. If you look at the data, it's very clear that our profession has a unique mental health crisis, one that I've been advocating to try to make better since I quit my law firm job a few years ago. But of course, these things take decades. And I hope that all of you guys will be part of that process, both by advocating for mental health's importance, but also by living out as an example what it is to be a balanced attorney doing things that you like. And so let's talk about that. When I was in big law, I got to a point where I felt like I could see my career in the future in that industry. I knew exactly what I would be doing 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now. I could feel it. I saw how the partners worked. I saw what my work looked like. I saw the money coming in. It did not excite me whatsoever. Maybe this is something you can relate to, regardless of if you're in big law or not, right? If you look ahead in your career trajectory and you're bored and unexcited at the prospect, I think it might be a sign that there are other things out there for you that are a better fit. That's certainly how I felt when I was in big law. Again, we talked about this. My mental health was at an all-time low. And so what I started thinking about is, well, what is the value of me staying in this big law career? Obviously, money. That's helpful, right? Money is power. It gives you freedom. Buy my Chipotle burritos with guacamole, right? These are important things. And LinkedIn clout, right? I have the resume of, I'm an attorney at this big firm. That's, I guess helpful a little bit. But when I started working on my own mental health, I very quickly realized that the individual growth, the developmental growth, my fulfillment in life, my relationships, my literal health, all of those things were improving at a clip that I thought was much more important and valuable than the value of, that paycheck, which was great, obviously, and similarly the resume points, call it, from having that firm job on my resume. And it wasn't an easy decision, but I felt like at that point in my life, there was only one rational choice to make. If I wanted to continue growing as an individual, reaching my full potential, seeing what else is out there too. There's a lot of value in that, and we'll talk about it. And so I decided to quit, even though I had nothing lined up. I had, interviewed for a couple of in-house jobs, but at the time, this was right in 2021, near the end of the pandemic. It was the in-house market was inundated because everybody in Big Law was burnt out and burning out. So I was going up against, 10-year of counsels for a mid-tier in-house position, it was difficult. And I didn't want to quit. I certainly didn't plan on it. And if you had, by the way, if you had told me when I graduated law school, Julian, you're going to burn out in roughly 3 years and quit outright with nothing lined up, I would have looked you dead in the eye and said, yeah, right, not me. Like I could do anything. I can handle anything. And the reality is that I could. If I wanted to, I could have stayed for another 10 years. But it just didn't feel right, especially when I felt like there were other things out there for me. And I wasn't getting a chance to even explore them because big law was just taking so much of my energy and time in a way that can be very suffocating. And I think a lot of law firm jobs can feel like that. And I think, look, when you think about entrepreneurship and working outside of the traditional career trajectory, part of it is courage, no doubt, right? You are heading into the unknown. You don't know where your next paycheck is going to come from. You don't know if you're going to be successful. There's a lot of questions, right? But if you reframe it, and there's a quote here by Phil Knight that I'll read out in a second that has always been a source of inspiration for me. If you reframe it, I think we're also taking less risk than we realize. And the power of the JD, one of the most powerful parts of it is that you have a decent, not perfect, but a decent foundation of job stability by having that degree because it allows you, if you've passed the bar, it allows you to practice law as a fallback, which is a great fallback. There will be plenty, for the most part, that there will be plenty of opportunities to practice law if you want to as a fallback. But even if you don't want to practice law, the JD lets you do business, lets you do government, lets you do NGO, nonprofit work, entrepreneurial endeavors. There's a lot of things out there that you can fall back on. And so the risk, is it really that big? Like if you think about quitting your job and trying something new for 1 year, I mean, worst comes to worst, you gain all this experience for a year. And let's say you don't earn, a lot of money, but how is that different than taking a sabbatical for, call it 6 months or 12 months? I mean, I know it's different, right? Taking a sabbatical, you're going to be on a beach reading your books and like relaxing. Being an entrepreneur is much more stressful. I understand it's not the same, but when you think about the risk assessment, practically speaking, it isn't a whole lot different. And that's also what I thought about when I left my job in big law. Now, for the quote itself, there comes a time in every life when the past recedes and the future opens. It's that moment when you turn to face the unknown. Some will turn back to what they already know. Some will walk straight ahead into uncertainty. I can't tell you which one is right, but I can tell you which one is more fun. And that is Phil Knight, the founder of Nike. I can tell you guys, having lived this reality of jumping into the unknown completely, not knowing at all what was going to come next, I 1,000,000% agree with him. And this is the thing that really drove me to leave big law more than the mental health. It was the desire for something more engaging and fun and energizing, because that's what a career should be. And that's what a life should be, not, dreading every day or feeling like you're stuck, because you're not stuck. We are the opposite of stuck. We have a lot of options if you're willing to take a risk and go find them. So after I quit, again, I really didn't know what I was going to do. I posted this story about, my own mental health struggles, kind of an overview of what we just talked about with here's the achievements, but here's the things you don't see. And I just put it on LinkedIn because I thought, you know what, this has been a lot. The pandemic has wrecked my mental health, and I'm sure a lot of other people's. Let me just put this out there and see if it's and I hope it's helpful to someone out there. That's literally the only thought I had putting it out there. And I was surprised to find that it went viral and people were very supportive of the message. And some people went as far as to say that it really impacted them. It brought them to tears. It like helped in some cases save people's lives, which look, there's probably some puffery there, no doubt, right? But at the same time, at this point, I didn't really know exactly where I wanted to take my career, but I knew that this was a positive message that I think it was important for people to hear. And so I started continuing to talk about my mental health story and the importance of mental health in the legal profession everywhere that I could. And I found myself, of all places, after iterating, first I was writing articles on LinkedIn, then I was writing articles on Medium, then I was posting on Instagram. And very soon, I found myself as the type A, sort of efficient-minded person, always trying to find the most efficient path forward that I am. I found myself on TikTok, because that's the place that my friends had told me, if you want to reach an audience, that's where you go. And I immediately saw the value when I posted some video. It took me 30 seconds to make, where I was like, just like for fun, showing folks like, here's what some of my friends from my law school are doing now. And coincidentally, it was things that are outside of the law, right? One of them was working in the music industry. One of them was mayor of Shreveport, Louisiana. One of them was creating a company to improve culture in law firms. And then there was me, I was talking about how I was advocating for mental health at the time. And it went viral overnight, and I got like 1,000 followers, whatever, in like 2 days. And I knew off the bat that this felt different, because that level of scale with the numbers is just something you don't see on other social media apps. And even today, it's the same. And it's been, 2.5 years since I made that video, and yet it's still, or maybe almost 3 years actually now that I made that video, and it's still the landscape has not changed a whole lot. But in any event, I started investing in social media as a content creator. I didn't really know what that was at the time, but I learned very quickly what it is to be a creator. Okay, making videos, building a community, going live and talking to the audience, mentoring people, talking about mental health, helping folks get into law school, helping people land jobs in big law that they want. Also, on the other side, criticizing big law for the toxic habits and work culture, calling out the fact that I don't think that it's healthy for parents to be normalizing having au pairs raise their kids just so you can make $3 million. It is possible to do both. Some people may see my content and think it's hypocritical if I provide advice on the one hand and advocate for change on the other. I do not. And in fact, if you look at many content creators, what you're going to find is that content creators have a diverse array of advocacy and of interests and even of niches that they are involved in. That's how they build a true community with roots. It's not by just being a one-trick pony, although some creators do that and maybe it works out. But that's not the only thing I was doing. I ran a Kickstarter campaign for this original e-commerce physical good that me and a couple of my friends had put together. It was essentially a new form of shower storage. I don't have the image here, but in any event, it was like, we embedded magnets in these bottles, so the bottles would slap on and off this wall that we had also designed. It was pretty neat. But at the time, it was shipping costs were crazy, so we had to basically raise like $100,000+ for this thing to get its initial batch of funding for the initial set of thousands that the manufacturer needed as a minimum order quantity, and we did pretty well. We raised like $15,000 off of zero ad spend. And but unfortunately it wasn't enough to hit that target, so that was something we fiddled around with. And separately from all of this, I took on coaching clients. Let me help you get into law school, let me review your personal statement, let me help you get into undergrad. Charging like an hourly rate. Let's see how that feels. I did Twitch streaming for a little bit, which is sort of an extension of content creating, but it's definitely a different universe. But that was fun too. Built a little community there for a while, made a couple $100 a month from that. Underlying all of this for me at the time was fail fast, right? I knew that a lot of these things probably weren't going to be successful in the long term. I knew a lot of them, I could feel that a lot of them were not making me anywhere near a living, right, financially. But I also knew that there was value in all of these things that I was doing. I could feel it. I could feel that I was learning skills. I could feel my knowledge, expanding. And more importantly, I could feel that if I didn't try it, then I'd always wonder, what if? What if I had tried an e-commerce product? What would have happened? Maybe I could have been, the next Shark Tank entrepreneur. What if I didn't try Twitch streaming? Maybe I could have been, XYZ. And to be clear, I could, I still have some of these thoughts to this day, but it's much more tampered down, in part because I actually tried my hand. I'm like, let me go and dive into this new area, figure it out, learn the space, try, actually put an attempt out there. If it doesn't succeed, it doesn't succeed. You move on. The point is, if you fail fast, you end up being successful sooner. And that's exactly what happened to me. Because after I cast this wide net of all these different things, two opportunities presented themselves as something that could support me financially. And to be clear, that doesn't need to be your goal. Okay. It does not need to be your goal to support yourself financially. But for me at the time, it was. And those two things were being a content creator, number one. Okay. My audience grew to a point that I started getting brand deals. Brands would come up and say, hey, Julian, we'll pay you X thousands of dollars to post a video with us. It wasn't enough to sustain, full-time living, at least one that I could really afford, but it was enough to show me there is value here. There is clearly, you're onto something, Julian, right? The world had rewarded me. All of those efforts and hours I put into building this community, it rewarded me by telling me, look, there is some financial value here to gain. Also, to take a step back and just give you a little insight on what it is to be a creator, being a creator on the financial side is very much just like a startup. You are growing exponentially over time to the extent you keep investing in that career. So even though it's not, hundreds of thousands of dollars we're talking about from these deals a couple of years ago and even today, it's that's really that's appropriate for where my creator career is right now, which I would say is part-time. Like I'm not a full-time creator. And if I were, again, it's like this. Okay. And I know this because obviously I do it myself and I also represent people who do this. So I see rapidly, how their growth, both in their community size, but also the brand deals and the compensation that they receive, it just scales like this. It's one of those long-term things. But in any event, it wasn't the only thing I was offered. Okay. I had many people reach out to me to be a consultant, sometimes a co-founder, and even as an attorney for various startup ventures. This can feel sometimes a little bit overwhelming because you don't really know what you don't know. I think it's easy in some sense to feel like, oh my God, there's an opportunity. I got to take it. That's something I had to work on personally when I first started doing all this, is figuring out where actually deserves my time and attention and where does not. Uh, that said, I didn't really find personally a lot of interest in a lot of these startups. So I did some consulting work for a couple of them, but at the end of the day, what really inspired me and what was unexpected for me was going back into the legal field. Because when I had quit, I didn't really know if I'd ever practice law again. I liked it. I didn't love it when I was in big law. And I certainly didn't want to work at like another law firm, big or small. But when I saw the value of being a content creator, because I, became one myself, I then saw that creators were being ripped off because creators are basically individuals, one person, small businesses, and these brands that come to them with these deals I just told you about, these brands have all the money for the fancy lawyers. So you can guess what happens next. Okay, these brands and these agencies take advantage of creators. They get really egregious terms. They rip off their IP. Sometimes they don't pay them for their work. These are some of the issues, not all of them. There's many that creators face. And so I decided, you know what, I got the skills. I know I can help at least myself and a couple of my friends who are creators. Why not open up a firm? And I'll call it For Creators by Creators, because that's what this firm is about, right? It's by a creator and it's for creators. And that is the main thing that I do now. In a lot, 2.5 years, I represent creators in all sorts of transactional issues. They have some litigation as well. We have over 200 signed clients, roughly in 2.5 years. And I get to call, I love what I do and I get to call it work. That's a line from a country song that I like recently. And I'm very grateful for that, right? And again, this is in the law, but you don't need to do work in the law to find this. This is just what happened for me and my example. One note on this, and that's to address the fact that, yes, this talk is about working outside of a lawyer job at the JD. I just want to note that what I'm doing in the law, it is a traditional lawyer job in the sense that I'm representing clients, right? I'm billing my time with certain clients. I'm advocating for them. I'm a lawyer, right? It's not necessarily outside of the law setting. What is different about it is that, number one, it's my own business that I get to set the direction and the pace for. And so to that end, it is an entrepreneurial endeavor, right? I can decide, do I want to invest in social media? Do I want to hire employees? Do I want to scale marketing? How do I want to grow this thing? It's all on me. I have to figure that out. And the second is that the type of law that I'm doing is relatively new. This is, content creator law, you can call it. It's obviously a blend of transactional law, contract law, entertainment law. But as a niche itself, very new, rapidly changing. So there are opportunities in the legal profession and in the traditional, practice of law to be more innovative and entrepreneurial. You just have to think outside the box a little bit, and you can find them. And I've touched on this before, right? But let's drill down here, because this was certainly the case for me. And like I've told you guys already, in my case, I didn't exactly have a strong North Star telling me, Julian, you should go become a clerk at, for this judge, or you should go lead a nonprofit, right? I didn't exactly have a strong, calling at the time until I found advocacy itself. But the reality is that if I wanted to do government or politics or business, work in a nonprofit, go into academia, entrepreneurship, like we've talked about. The JD is quite literally magical, in my opinion, because it lets you do all of these things. And it's just a matter of getting there. And there are so many examples, of people who have the JD and do not practice law, and instead they do these things. We'll talk about a couple of them, but I think if there's one thing I want you to take away from this talk, it's that the JD is a tool for you and not the other way around. You can use it like any tool, right? You use it when you want to, and you put it down when you want to. If you don't need it, you put it in the shelf, and then you decide, oh, I want it again. I need it right now. I'm going to open the shelf. I'm going to take it out, just like a screwdriver. Your ability to practice law and be a lawyer will not go anywhere. They're not going anywhere. Even if you take a break, okay, look at me, whatever, 8, 9, 10 months. I know that's a relatively short break, but you can go for years. The number of people I've talked to who took breaks for this reason or that and came back. Law is one of those professions that once you earn your way in, you have that foundation, and it gives you that ability to come back in. So just never forget that the JD is a tool for you, and don't let the tail wag the dog, in the sense that don't let the JD make you feel like you need to practice law and that you can't do other things, because you absolutely can. And to this point, this is what I saw a lot of when I was in industry. And of course, I still see it in my community today, and I see it in friends and whatnot. So many lawyers have that mindset of, if I don't practice law, then, this was all a waste of my time, right? Why did I go to law school? Why did I pass the bar? This, if I step away from this, none of that was worth it. And therefore, this is the part that's problematic, right? I mean, that idea is problematic too, but therefore, I should stay in this job that I don't like, because if I don't, then I wasted all that time. The reality is, of course, you didn't waste it, right? I just told you it's a tool. You earned it. You can go back to it later if you want. But there's also this idea that a lot of lawyers have, and this is not just specific to lawyers, but there's the fear of judgment, okay? When people think about doing something different, they think about, what are my colleagues going to think? What are my friends and family going to think? If I decide to quit my 6-figure law firm job and open up a new toothpaste company, what? What are these people going to think? They're going to think I'm crazy, right? Does not matter at the end of the day. Are you going to live your life for other people's expectations of you, which are constantly changing and truly which you don't even understand and know? Or are you going to live a life for yourself, right? You just don't know. But that fear of judgment, I think, paralyzes many lawyers. Of course, so does the fear of the unknown. It can be scary, right? Stepping into something new, but that's also why there's a lot of value. Decide to be one of those people that steps into the unknown, you become one of those rare folks who broke out of the mold. I'll say, like, how do you put this? Like, fewer people do it, which means there's actually a lot more opportunity than you think, because not that many people actually do it. The bottom line is, here's the worst case scenario, okay, is these mindsets lock lawyers into unhappy jobs that they don't like, so they stay miserable. Okay, they feel like they have golden handcuffs, or maybe they don't want to, let their family down, or they, again, feel like they wasted their time getting a law degree if they were to step away. Whatever the reason, they're unhappy, they're dissatisfied. That turns into bigger issues like substance abuse or mental health conditions. Eventually, that could lead to the unthinkable, which I don't want to talk about again, but I think you all know what I'm talking about. And the reality is very simple. It's very simple. A lot of these people would be happier out of their job and even out of law itself. I don't know which, it's different for everybody, but a lot of them would be happier if they only took action. And that's the thing that you need to think about, is how are you going to take action to find that thing that you want? Just a couple of examples of people here for, for you to chew on. And I'm sure you have in your network people who have the JD and don't use it, or have used it for other things. Obviously, me, we thought about that. Some of my colleagues from my old firm, Spencer Markle, he was an associate mid-level associate at DLA Piper. He decided to quit, and he became a serial entrepreneur. He sold these things called cub coats, like these little stuffed animals that convert into coats for kids. It's like a big, successful company. And then he went and founded another company in the social media space. Ken De Leon, Wilson Sonsini guy, who decided, I'm going to go become a realtor. And then he did, and he optimized selling real estate in the Bay Area, became the #1 selling, I think it was Caldwell, realtor in America for multiple years. Became a real estate agent, right? Berkeley law guy, huge name in the area now. Countless politicians. Okay, again, you probably have examples of this. How do you know if it's time to make a change? Well, we've touched on it a little bit, but the bottom line is if you don't feel satisfied or energized by your job. And you might be thinking, well, Julian, isn't that any job? Like most people complain about work. That's kind of in our culture, right? Like Blink 182, work sucks, I know. Yeah, to some degree, yes. Okay, like it's not exactly fun to do something for 50 hours a week every week or 40 hours a week every week, but there like anything, there's a sliding scale to it. Okay. Um, I think a sign that it's really not a good fit is if you go on vacation and you don't come back refreshed. And that's not because the vacation wasn't refreshing. It was because the dissatisfaction with the career is so deep that no, you know, period of time is going to change the fact that your existential future in that career path is not something that excites you. Um, but there's other things that you should think about too. Okay. If you don't think that your potential is being truly reached, that's a big one. At least it was for me. I felt like there were a lot of strengths that I had that Big Law was not harnessing appropriately. And I tried to make those strengths like match them, you know, with the Big Law setting. But, you know, leadership in those firms tend to be a little bit slower, right? And so I felt like there's a lot of ideas that I had I wanted to put into practice that I couldn't and I wanted to see what I could do, right? So if you feel like you're not reaching your true potential, that's certainly part of it. And I want to note that some people live in denial, in my opinion, thinking that this type of feeling will go away someday, or that they need to tough it out, which is again just like not the correct way to think about it, in my opinion. But I don't really think that it does. I think a lot of people will just swallow it and accept that like life, this is life. It's gonna suck. And sometimes it will. Okay, I'm not trying to say that work is always gonna be fun. Like, of course it isn't. That's unrealistic. But um, again, it's about figuring out if this is a sustainable path for you. Most importantly, what I'm thinking about for you is your mental health. And of course, what carries over is your physical health. How do you actually get there? Okay, what are some actionable things you can do? First, you need to understand and learn what is it to actually do that career or job that you're interested in. If you don't know, that's not a problem. That's why you talk to these people to figure it out. You know, cold email or cold LinkedIn DM folks that have that career path that you're thinking about. Reach out to people in your network, your friends, your family, your colleagues. Just understand, what does a day in their life look like, right? We can trick ourselves into thinking that we want something only to get there and realize this isn't what we thought it was. Well, you can preempt that a little bit by talking to these people in advance, right? Will you even like it? If you do like it and if you think it's something you want to do, well, then ask them how they got there. Unpack it, right? Deconstruct the path to get to where you want, and then just start executing on those tasks to get there. If you're trying to do something in a traditional setting, like change law firms, for example, you know, recruiters can be helpful, very helpful. Kate Reeder Sheik is one of my favorites. She's actually a friend of mine, and she does, you know, big law recruiting, and she has a lot of great LinkedIn content if anybody's curious on a recruiter. But use the resources you have, right? No harm at all in getting a recruiter to help you. More importantly than talking to people and getting information, though, it's number 2 and 3 in this slide. Okay, it's taking action. That's the most important one. And what I mean by taking action is, I know that it's tough when you're in a 9 to 5 career, especially in the legal world where it's usually not a 9 to 5, it's usually like a 7 to 7. But in the little time that you do have outside of your job, channel that energy, channel that spirit, whether it's entrepreneurial, whether it's interested in, you know, government or being a nonprofit organizer, whatever it is, channel it and do something with that little bit of time to build uh, that that new path for yourself. It might mean studying, right? It might mean talking to people. It might mean developing a framework. There's a lot of different ways that you can leverage that time, but there's you shouldn't let yourself just sit there in your career and think, well, maybe someday if I quit outright, then I'll invest my time in it. The reality is you can actually do a lot more than you think with a little bit of time that you have. And more importantly, I think doing that exercise will give you that sense of courage and experience that will let you down the line decide to make that call, which is number 3, right? Making a leap of faith in part, but also just a career leap into something else, right? I think it's a lot harder to do that if you're just coming in blind. It's a lot easier if you have spent, X number of hours every month working on this new project. So it has some sort of potential and you've done some work on it. You're not just like running away with an idea. One other couple note or a couple of other notes I should say. This is something that I've been reflecting on lately is I think a goal for everybody should be to try to become rare. Don't necessarily become, rich or chase like the money or the titles or any of that. I think in this sort of path that's unconventional, the thing that you should try to hone in on is, are you building skills and learning stuff? And if so, that's great. That should be the thing that you are chasing, at least for the short term. Obviously, in the long term, you need money, you need to figure out how to make it sustainable. Yes, but the thing that's going to set you apart in the long term is that you are different from the rest of the crowd. And the way to get to that point is to get that experience itself, get that knowledge, right? Become something that is valuable, become someone that is valuable in a certain context, and then leverage that expertise for whatever it is that you decide. And it's different for everybody. For me, it was becoming a content creator and then seeing how the legal side, was implicated with the business of being a creator. That makes me personally very rare. I can't tell you guys the number of times that clients say, well, yeah, I'm definitely going to sign with you because you get it, because you're a creator. And I tell them, yeah, I am. And I can advise them not only on the legal side, but also on the creative side, what it is to be a creator, what strategy they should take their brand, should they do more of this video or that video? I know all this stuff because I'm doing it myself too. Again, that's one example, but there's many others. And one final note, okay? Take off the JD hat, the law hat, take off the degrees that you have. Like, let's just level set as a human being. Okay, my name is Julian. You are, insert your name on the other side of the screen. We're just human beings here, okay? Life is supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be enriching. It's supposed to be energizing. It's supposed to be exciting. It's supposed to be positive. Period. End of sentence. That's what life is supposed to be. I don't care what career you do. I don't care if you have one kid or no kids or 5 kids. I don't care if you're married, if you're single. I don't care what background you come from. I don't care what you want to do in 20 years or 10 years or tomorrow. Life is supposed to be positive. Never forget that. That philosophy for me is the thing that drove me out of Big Law, and I'm happy it did. Personally, right? Again, it's not, Big Law isn't bad for everybody, but things like big paychecks and superficial career clout, I think, can often blind us to the simplicity of what life should be, which is that it should be positive. And if it's not, then it's time to do some reflection and take some time to figure out how you can reconstruct, your day-to-day to make it positive, because you absolutely can. It just comes down to taking action. And don't forget that you have the most powerful tool in your pocket, which is the JD. You put it down and you pick it up as it suits you. And that should give you a lot of confidence in whatever it is you decide to do next. So that is it from me. Now we can happy to do Q&A. Thank you guys for listening. I appreciate it. And if you're listening at home, I hope you found this enriching.
So first of all, thank you so much. A couple of things that I want to that I picked up was, again, JD is a tool. You use it for all these other opportunities. You can always go back to using it. And also, I want to say thank you so much for sharing your personal story with mental health, because I think that, one, we do know there is an increase in depression compared to the general population for lawyers and a lot of those things. So I appreciate your vulnerability and sharing your experience, because I think that clearly it happens to many of the attorneys. And again, you always can go back to your JD. You will always have your JD. Once you get that degree, nobody can take it away from you. So that is an achievement. A couple of things that I also wanted to mention is that I was a legal recruiter, although I'm not an attorney. What I found was that, and this is on the agency side, was that the attorneys that became legal recruiters were really quite successful. They were able to talk the talk. And so I was just thinking about it, that's another great career, because the money is great. The other attorneys do have a different respect when they find they're talking to a legal recruiter who is an attorney. So that is a great career. I'm also just going to, we do have some questions. Wanted to mention if you like working at a law firm, but you don't like the billable hours, and you want the benefits of a law firm, there are conflicts attorneys. There are the head of legal recruiting. There's in-house legal recruiting. So again, having that JD does set you apart from other employees, and there are other opportunities again at a law firm. So want to start with a couple of Q&As. Besides trying various paths, what questions did you ask yourself to figure out what makes you happy and what you're good at in terms of using your JD?
Um, it's kind of the million-dollar question is how do you figure out what you love to do for a living? Besides trying different things, I thought about the things that drove me to becoming a lawyer and going to law school. Why did I go down that path, right? Why did I do all these other things? Why did I want to work in politics? Why did I want to work at a law firm that focused on technology companies? These things have a common theme, okay? On the public policy side, there's an interest in policy and politics, clearly. On the technology company side, there's an interest in helping small businesses and entrepreneurs. Underlying both of those things is a love for advocacy and an interest in advocating, right, for change, some type of change, or on behalf of one type of client. So part of it is grounding yourself, reminding yourself of your values and reflecting on why it is that took the path that led you to where you are now. Because things can change in your life, certainly, and opinions can change, but the big decisions that you made in the past leading you here, I don't think that the motivating factors behind those are likely to change, especially something like going to law school. But again, it's easy to lose sight of that. And I think that's why it's important to take that time to reflect on your values.
Excellent. I want to read one comment. Thank you for the reminder that we can always go back to using our JD if we decide to put it down for a little while. Great lecture. So again, that's a huge point. Another question is obtaining a license, passing the bar, is that necessary to pursue these opportunities?
I don't think so, especially if you're not going to be practicing law. However, and I'm not, this is not my forte, so take this with a grain of salt. There's probably a little bit of an advantage if you apply to these jobs if you have bar certification. They might just ask, right? Like, okay, so you have a JD, did you pass the bar or not? Yes or no? All else equal between two candidates, I could see a world where they take the person who's passed the bar just for the sake of, okay, it's another qualification. But it's definitely not a requirement. I mean, if you're not practicing law, you just don't even need it. And I know some attorneys, some friends of mine, one of them is a social media creator, and she had opportunities right out of the gate from law school to make a living doing, her own marketing and social media and branding and whatnot. And she still hasn't taken the bar. And I'm not even sure she will because she's finding success doing these other things. So definitely not a requirement if you're not going to practice law.
Excellent. And somebody asked, what is Substack? Substack.
Oh, Substack. Substack is I didn't touch on this much. It's sort of like a blog platform. It's a platform that lets you as a writer go on it. You create your own sort of newsletter. It handles all the other stuff for you, like the creating of the format and the template of it, the subscription management, the emails, like you don't have to pay to send out all these emails. Whereas if you have a traditional mail service like MailChimp or whatnot, you typically have to pay. So Substack is they call it like some people call it like the social media of writing and of writers. I don't really think it's as much social media as it is. Again, it's just a platform to help writers get their name out there.
Excellent. Something that you did talk about in terms of how to make the transition to other positions. Is that something maybe you can talk a little bit more about how you might present it on your resume? Something like that.
I think that being earnest and honest goes a long way. Obviously, there's a little bit of salesmanship if you're explaining a unconventional path on your resume, and it's different for everybody, but if you focus on the fact that you were hustling and doing something, I think that's the most important thing. So, for my break, for example, let's say 10 months later, I went back into the law firm world. And in that 10 months, what did I do? I advocated on social media and I had a failed Kickstarter campaign. I phrase it that way, but I mean, that's reality, right? I would say, yeah, like, I decided that I wanted to explore other endeavors, including working on my own mental health. In that process, I decided to, advocate for its importance on social media, where I built, an audience of 1,000 people. Doesn't need to be huge, right? Whatever. 500 people. And in addition to that, I had an entrepreneurial itch, and so I worked on this new project. It's a new form of shower storage, and we took it on Kickstarter, and again, numbers, right? I did this number of raise with zero ad spend, and we had this many pre-sales, despite again, not investing more than $100 a person into this project. So I think if you can sell at least a couple of facts or points that you gained from it, even if it's something that enriched you personally, but not necessarily, externally was validated, then, and of course you say it with confidence, because that's like half of interviewing is just like saying it with confidence, and then just, have the person move on to the next thing, right? Then I think that that's more than appropriate and fair. And I think it makes you more interesting. And I think that people are actually refreshed by that. I don't think it's a bad thing.
Excellent. We have another question. You mentioned that you practice law for content creators. As creators are all over the country and world, this person is curious about how the licensing is handled. And would we be limited to practicing for creators only in the states where we're admitted?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's something I wrestle with to make sure that I'm not violating, ethical rules for the different states and jurisdictions where my clients live. I'll say a couple things. First, most of my clients are in California, which is where I'm licensed, just because that happens to be where a lot of creators go, is LA, right? And the creator world out here, so to speak. The second is I do not advise on other state legal issues. So to the extent a creator gets a brand deal, let's say that, Coca-Cola comes and gives a client 50 grand for a video. When I review that contract, I would say 80% of the time, maybe less than that. Let's call it 50% of the time, there isn't even a choice of forum clause in that contract, which is partly why I'm here to help, if my client wants that sort of clause to insert it. But the point is, the legal work itself is by nature not state specific. So I'm personally comfortable as a transactional attorney handling this work because to me, it's common law contract law at that point. It is not, Washington law. Let's say if my client, lives in Washington up there. That's the second thing I'll say. The third thing I'll say is part of what I do a little bit in my practice is massage these agreements so that they are steeped in California legal provisions, like a choice of forum and choice of law clause for California. And I tell my clients that I do that because if push comes to shove and something happens here with this deal, I want to be able to represent you in the dispute. Does it fix necessarily the geographical limitations of where a client lives and whatnot? Not necessarily, but again, with the state of the world that we're in right now, and this may change, but I don't really see it happening in the short term, transactional attorneys like myself tend to have a diffuse practice as long as we are not actually practicing the law of a different state. And that again depends on the type of practice that you have. But certainly for my practice, that rarely, if ever, comes up.
Excellent. We have another question. How did you teach yourself the area of law you're practicing to feel confident starting your own
Yeah,
practice?
it's a great question. It took time, right? I mean, I would say it took like a year of doing the job and actually representing these folks in these types of deals to get like a good sense of confidence. But I'll caveat that by saying when I was in big law, okay, yes, it's intense, but it is excellent training. It is the best training. That's partly why most lawyers go into big law after law school. It's really good training. And I asked a million questions to understand the why behind every little decision that I or my senior attorney was making. And what that gave me is something a lot more important than the knowledge of one specific legal provision, because it gave me judgment for understanding when do I push back on something, when do I leave it alone, should I advise the client this way or should I let it be? And when I looked at these contracts in the brand deal space, I knew 90% of what those terms did. Maybe there was 10%, right? That I didn't fully I wasn't very, very confident, I'll put it that way, right? And I didn't have obviously the experience that I have now of having done like 1,000 of the deals. But what I did have is, well, I know we should push back on this, this, and this. I know that much, and I know that I can, and I know that I'm going to try. And that's all I really needed. I don't think that this is another thing a lot of lawyers do is we're very perfectionistic. We think that like we need to be like we need to have done it 1,000 times for us to feel qualified to do it once. The reality is, I like to remind myself, there's so many bad lawyers, dude. There's like a lot, like really bad. Like you look at them and you're like, that's illegal. That should be illegal. And yet they charge like 5 grand for it. Anyway, I think we're holding ourselves to these standards that are a little unrealistic. And so the important thing is, are you providing, what is it? Is it minimal level of competency, right? Is like the standard for the ethical guidelines. Do you have that judgment? Are you confident enough in yourself that you'll figure it out? Um, my firm started very slowly. A law firm is very much like a consulting business where you start with 0 clients and then eventually you have enough that it takes up your day. But at first it was not at all, taking up anywhere near even a third of my day. So it was that actually I don't think was a bad thing because it provided me space to actually learn these issues and then deep dive on them when I felt like I needed to. But the positive thing is that after doing one, two, three, four, five, you learn very quickly. What are the issues? What's common, what isn't common, and then it scales from there. Obviously, because now I've done like thousands of these deals, so I know the space arguably better than anybody else that I've met. Um, but the thing that got me there was the judgment, and I got that in turn from my training in big law. So
And I think you just answered part two of this person's question. If we're interested in learning a new area of law, what advice do you have on where to start?
yeah. Yeah, I mean, the 100%, the first thing is to just get really good training because the training is going to give you the power to learn any area of law that you want. But then the next part is try to find a mentor, right? Very helpful. I mean, like for example, in my firm, I do trademarks, right? Trademark filings for clients. I didn't know how to do trademarking, but I had somebody in my community, it was in my Twitch community, who was an attorney, trademark lawyer for like 30 years. And we just became friends. And he was a great guy. And I asked him one day if he'd be willing to help train me on how to do trademarks. He said 100%. So we got on a Zoom call and then he literally walked me through as an expert veteran in the space, how do you do it? And so we are an apprenticeship-based profession at our core, lawyers. So it really helps if you can find an attorney mentor in or out of your firm who will help you.
And just in terms of a mentor, here in Massachusetts, we have the SJC Standing Committee. They have a very, very robust mentoring program. So if you go to their website, there are a number of attorneys that are volunteering there, and you can sign up. There are short-term mentoring opportunities as well as long-term where you stick with somebody for a number of months. We do have another question. If your background had been entirely in plaintiff side litigation contingency work, where would you start to begin picking up the transactional skills that you have and use now?
Hmm. First thing I would do is talk to any people in my network to see if they have any needs. So try to find a client, right? Like you sell your experience and massage it, obviously. I have 20 years of legal experience, so I can help you. You don't need to dive into the specifics of like, well, it was in this area of law that's not what you're doing. Like, don't tell them that part. Okay. Like this is sales, right? Like you just want to tell them the things that make you the most qualified and the best candidate, the most rational choice for their business. And then start with the things that you can do. Okay, let me be honest. Anybody can learn how to file an entity in any state in the United States of America for an LLC, for example, right? That does not stop me or other lawyers from charging them thousands of dollars to do it. But at the end of the day, what am I doing? I'm going on an online forum, I'm clicking some buttons, I'm putting in the name of the company, I'm hiring a registered agent, and then I'm drafting like an operating agreement, which for the most part, you can get like a form off LegalZoom. So I think the first step is to just try to find the actual customers for you. And that can come down to branding yourself. It can come out to opening up your own shop so that there's an avenue to take these clients. But then I think you do at the beginning of the process need to allow the client base to drive you, not the other way around, because you're trying to break into a new area of law. I don't think you have enough leverage in that situation to dive right into practicing a different, a specific type of transactional work. So I'd recommend to that person sell the experience, find the customers who are willing to hire you for transactional work, and then learn it as you go. If you need help on learning how or why, well, that's a little trickier, I think. reach out to people on LinkedIn and try to network a little bit. And there's also plenty of platforms that allow you to hire lawyers. Like that's a very trendy thing right now. I think like I want to say Up Counsel is one of them. Don't quote me on that, but there's many platforms where you can hire an attorney for like a specific project. So something you could do is invest in your own skill set, pay $100 to have this lawyer who knows what they're doing review it, study how they reviewed it. Now you have it in your brain, you know, at least that specific iteration. So
Excellent. And I know we're at 1 o'clock, but just a couple more questions or one other question. So one, it says your career journey is very inspiring. Thank you for your time and reminding us that a JD is a magical degree and an incredible tool we can use
okay.
when and how to want and how we want. Thank you for sharing your experiences and offering a different perspective. One other question, and I'll ask this really quickly for those that can stay on. For those that have a different personality, maybe not as entrepreneurial as you or some others, and they're a little bit on the quieter side, what would you recommend for those folks in terms of other options if they don't, again, want to quote unquote practice law, like compliance or something like that? Any thoughts for those, a different personality type?
I think like so here's the thing. I'm not a resident expert in all the jobs out there. And there are so many, right? That exist in the conventional, call it like Fortune 500 umbrella of like jobs, or whether it's like product manager or like you mentioned, compliance expert or recruiting is a bit more social, maybe not that. But I guess if I were in that person's shoes, I would just try to have as many conversations with different people in different career paths that I could to figure out where are the good fits. I don't unfortunately have a silver bullet answer because again I only know like my domain, right, and the things that I've worked in. But what I will say is there's a lot of opportunity to be like innovative and to take some more ownership and control in a conventional corporate world and regime. It may not be big law, like I don't think it is, to be honest. That's just kind of that style of that industry. But in academia even, or like a hospital system, I'm reading Michelle Obama's book right now, right? And she was like in charge of this whole new initiative that a hospital in U Chicago was undertaking. That's one of the things she did before being first lady. It's like there's a lot of these roles out there you don't really know exist until again, right? You get involved, you start talking to people, and then one thing leads to another, leads to another, leads to another. So just have those conversations, and it'll find you. It just may take
Excellent.
a couple of years.
Excellent. And by the way, so for those that want to learn how to network a little bit more from what Julian was talking about, I'm more than happy to set up an appointment and help you out how to use LinkedIn in that regard. Um, Again, we're a little over time. Thank you so much. Clearly, lots of questions, lots of interest in this topic. We really do appreciate your time. And again, thank you for sharing your personal experience. I think that's so powerful for folks to know they're not alone. And again, sometimes the traditional role is not cut out for everybody. So there are other opportunities out there. Thank you again. Thank you all for joining us. And we do appreciate your time. And hopefully we'll see you next month with our next webinar for busy lawyers.
Thanks, everybody.
All right. Thank you. Bye.